Okay, we're going to get started, so find a seat. And we are here today to talk a bit about coalitions and reimagining coalitions. And the truth is, the more we work together, the more we can leverage our strengths, the more we can fill in the gaps, the more we can strengthen democracy in local areas, in different kinds of communities, and across the state. As you heard earlier today, none of us can do all this alone. There are many, many, many aspects of democracy in Pennsylvania that need to be addressed, lots of structural change that needs to happen, and any group that thinks they're going to cover it all is going to actually cover none, because it's too much, and you get spread way too thin, which is why the League was instrumental in helping start Fair Districts PA to say, we got to have some folks who just focus on this thing and hammer away on this thing, while other people are hammering away on other things. So, but they all need to be done. None of these things are things we can ignore or step away from. So we've got different people becoming experts on different things, but then how do we leverage that across our communities in a way that makes sense? So we've got some different people who've put a lot of thought into this. They've done a lot of lot of experience in this. I'm excited to hear from them. So we're going to hear from three primary speakers: Susan Boser, Nick Pressley, and Drew Hart, who you'll be hearing from more afterwards. But then we've got a couple other folks. I want to just make sure I know who else is here. So Susan Spicka, are you here? Yes, Susan, she's with PA Ed Voters. Sandra Miller, are you here? She's with AAUW and with PA Ed Voters. And anybody else who's with a group that's done coalition work? Okay, we're gonna kind of bring them into the conversation kind of at the end, just to share a little bit of their own insights, how they've been doing this. But the questions we're going to start with for each of our three primary folks, give me a moment, because my phone has gone in the wrong direction, and I have these questions here. So the questions, and they're allowed to change these up and do whatever they want with these questions, but this is kind of where we're starting the conversation, is what good strategies have you discovered for connecting with partners in the areas where you work, rural, urban, faith community, etc. What works best in building shared activities and strategies? What has worked in your efforts to partner with organizations or groups that have different but parallel priorities? And you heard, there's, Business for America, they're slightly parallel to us, but not quite the same. All voting is local, parallel to us, not exactly the same. How do we partner up when we don't have exactly the same goal, but we all have the same vision and the same overall concern? What does that look like? And then what venues or platforms have you used to build visibility and engagement beyond the echo chambers? So they're going to answer this in whatever they want. We're going to start with Susan Boser, then we're going to hear from Nick, then we're going to hear from Drew. I'll introduce Drew because you didn't have a chance to meet him earlier, and then we'll hear from our other friends as well.
Thank you, Carol. Good afternoon. Very exciting, all of this, and some of this, I'm afraid, is probably going to, if you were in the talk that Nick just gave, some of this is going to be examples of exactly what he's talking about, so I'm kind of excited about that, or things that you heard this morning. But because we're just a few minutes and there's lots of people we want to hear on, I want to try and be very specific and very focused. In terms of particular strategies, some of the things that we're finding are, first of all, when we're doing our mapping and figuring out who else is out there, to really try to think outside of some of the traditional boundaries, or people that we know think like us. So really actively seeking to connect with and engage with people who have some very different perspectives. As an example, one of the things that somebody mentioned, I think it was a person who raised a question in Nick's talk, talked about going to local festivals. Again, my experience is heavily rural. But to go to the Knotweed Festival or the Hellbender Festival or those kinds of things, we're showing up at those things, we're setting up a booth and being present. However, in the course of that, we see other booths. So maybe there's one for gun rights, okay? Rural area, you're gonna see that. Or maybe there's one that is supporting, one very controversial in our area regarding protection of a set of woods. And but what we do is we don't stay in our encampment and kind of like give them the evil eye. We reach out, extend a hand, talk with them, tell me about your issue. And with the gun rights people in particular, we have found them extremely receptive on the issue of the rules, about the number of pieces of gun safety legislation, bipartisan sponsored, that sat in committee for well over a year, okay? They were really keenly interested in that and did not know about it. and they got energized about the issue of rules. And you wouldn't think that a gun rights group would be welcome bedfellows for maybe the League of Women Voters. But we have found that that kind of outreach and thinking creatively can make a difference. Secondly, in terms of strategies that we have found useful, a couple of things I want to highlight. If you reach out to anybody in our area, because it's a small population and everybody is doing everything, if you say you want to join a committee, you can almost be guaranteed that they don't have time, they're not interested, and they run as fast as they can. Seriously. However, if you come with a particular issue and you have a particular strategy, it's focused, it's time limited, and they're making a substantive contribution that's going to make a difference, they'll engage. Example I want to offer. A month ago, prior to the last election, thank God, when we were facing the potential for 5 constitutional amendments to be going forward, okay? We reached out to AAUW, we reached out to NAACP and a couple of others and had a coalition meeting about this specific issue. Some of the folks weren't crisp on some of the details of it, but what we asked them to do, we just invited the leaders of the groups. We wanted to do a project that basically had 2 parts. One is that our goal was to inundate the local education mechanisms, newspapers, etc., with information about this issue. We wanted to use these organizations working together to just put together a cache of letters on different elements, maybe process, maybe reproductive issues, etc., related to these 5 amendments. Put together these letters, and then once the letters were created, house them in a common place, and then each of the coalitions, or each member of the coalition reaches out to their lists and says, these letters are here. We need to have something in our local papers every single week from now until. We had wonderful responses, and there were people who knew a little bit about it, but not an awful lot, but significantly increased our reach with that. But it was very specific. If we'd asked them to join a committee, there's no way. Third one I want to mention is that we've had to be very creative about ways of reaching out to people and communicating. Again, rural areas, not high use of social media, okay? So what we found to be extremely effective was to work through our local radio station. We have an AM and an FM radio station. They do a morning show on Thursday mornings, and they interview people. And you just let them know in advance, you can come in. And what we've been doing is partnering a league person with an FDPA person. League person talks about an issue. One that we did recently was school funding, okay, specifically to the inequities of school funding. And then we had an FDPA person there that was talking about the issue of rules as well. Okay, very, very well received. We're working on one right now for gun safety that we'll do with a partnership again between FDPA and the league. So those kinds of arrangements are reaching people. People listen to it out in the rural areas, so listen to the local radio. The next one I want to also mention is about publicly, I appreciated this about what Nick said, but publicly appreciating who does what. When anybody makes a contribution of any kind, publicly acknowledge them. We're also really, really big on putting people's pictures in the newspaper and said, so-and-so just did this for us and is working on these issues. And the newspaper is always happy to have something to print. And then finally, one of the things we've started doing is going to, for people that we're not as well connected with, when they have their annual dinner or annual event, the group that I'm most active with, which is a league, will literally buy a table and invite a lot of people to come, name gets set up, and then we'll do a lot about publicizing the important work of this particular group and the things that they do. So we're showing active support in a very public way for them and their interests and their causes. And that also goes a long way to building goodwill. Is that 10 minutes? Probably. Okay. So I've got a list, but let me give it over to Nick.
Thank you, Susan. I'm going to repeat some of the things she said, but just different words. I don't know if I can. I think this is about... Yeah, I'll speak up, though. what good strategies have you discovered for connecting with partners in the areas where you work? Susan just said it. Show up. You really got to show up for the organizations that you want to work with, for your partners. You got to show them that you're not just asking them for something, you're also giving them something. Even if it's not something you typically work on, show up. When I asked CASA to come stand with us on the Capitol steps, as Susan may remember, Susan Spicka back in the back, may remember, for our annual budget rally, I went and protested with them outside of the detention center in Phillipsburg, Sandra County. Show up. You really have to make sure that they understand that this isn't just a transactional relationship, it's a transformational relationship. You're going to grow in this work together. You're not just taking, you're not just receiving, you're literally showing up and building community. What works best in building some of these shared activities is that homework, talking to them, understanding what motivates them, what makes them tick, and what kind of activities do they like. You know, I'm not going to go and invite an organization who doesn't like to knock doors to join me for a rally and then knock doors. I want to understand what they're good at, what they're trained for, and kind of cater to that a little bit. When you're dealing with organizations that have different but parallel priorities like mine and yours, it's important to draw that connection explicitly. The reason why AVL and Fair Districts can work together is that we both want to make sure that we are building power for people to exercise their voices and make sure that our lines are fair so that our voices are heard effectively. You build that in that theory of change I talked about earlier. You build that when you start coming up with your campaign and what you want to do. You build that by being super explicit on how we relate to each other and how we can continue to work together. As far as venues or platforms, I mean, Susan said what I was going to say. Radio is something we had a lot of success with, especially in rural areas. You want to find where people gather, and you want to take advantage of that. You want to find places where you can reach more people, and that comes from also knowing your power map. I'll never forget my first petitioning period as an organizer back in 2014 in Philadelphia. And at first I tried to get people to stop and talk to me on the streets to sign a petition. And then I realized, wait a second, let me go to the subway station. And I filled those lists up quickly because I found a place where people are gathering so that, they're kind of a captive audience, but I tried to get real creative with that. When I was recruiting canvassers in Kansas City, Missouri, my job back then was to wander the streets of KCMO and offer people jobs. I realized I would have a lot more success if I went to the barbershops. Found people who were gathering. Try to be super creative, think outside the box, because honestly, we have to continue to stay flexible in the work that we do in order for us to succeed. I don't know if that was 10 minutes or not, but.
So I think I fit in a different box because I kind of wear multiple hats. And so I come to this as someone who does, well, I'm a professor. I do some faith-based organizing. I also do programming to actually train and equip leaders to get more involved in justice work as well. So I have these kind of different hats that I wear. But one of the things that I've realized is really important, especially living in Harrisburg for the second time, but originally being from Philly, is just relationships and how important they are. That at the end of the day, I need to come in and just be seeking to build relationships, knowing that some of these relationships aren't even necessarily going to develop. So I can't only see people as potential opportunities for collaboration. I'm just building relationships. So I've had countless coffees and meals with pastors and faith leaders and different org leaders in my city, just for the sake of getting to know them, wanting to know what they're about, what their desires are, what their hopes are, and sharing some of mine. And many of those things have developed into further collaborations, but I didn't necessarily know from the beginning how they would. I didn't have plans for each and every one of them, but I was just ongoing, inviting people to have coffee or meals, and vice versa. I will admit I have a little bit, maybe an advantage in terms of in faith communities that are justice oriented, I have a little bit more visibility. So it also was mutual. People reaching out to me, wanting to have meals as well around some of these issues. As others already said, show up, right? I mean, I think I'm going to echo a little bit of what was already said, but just showing up to other people's stuff, right? Showing up when MILPA's having their, events around driver's license for undocumented citizens, like I show up. And usually what happens is, without even expecting, hey, they'll call me Reverend in that space. Hey, Reverend, can you send a prayer or something like that, right? But just for the fact that they see and recognize that I'm physically there, that I'm supporting the work that they're doing, without any strings attached, I'm showing up. And I think that that's really important. If you want to, even, banquets and all kinds of stuff, the things that are happening where other leaders are doing work, I'm trying to be present and trying to be involved. Some of those, I think that's important. And I think with that second part of that first question, what works best in building shared activities and strategies? I mean, I think this is obvious, but building shared activities really requires that you allow people to shape the work with you, right? That it's not just your agenda. It's so easy to come in because we all have things that we are trying to get done. We have goals, we have campaigns that we're working on. But if we are really going to collaborate with others, it actually has to be mutual, and people have to have a sense of ownership over those things. So when thinking about what has worked in your efforts to partner with organizations or groups that have different but parallel priorities, one of the things that I've been doing, again, I work with, and I'll share a little bit about this during my talk as well, but one of the things I do, we created a program called Thriving Together Congregations for Racial Justice. We have 12 congregations from a whole wide variety of different denominations, ecclesial backgrounds, theological convictions, all kind of stuff. And so to work with them, we had to, one, take very seriously each of their own unique congregations' missions and traditions and values, like not try to homogenize and pretend that they're all the same, and take them where they're at and where they're coming from. And then think about, what is it, like Derek Bell talked about interest convergence, right? But where do our interests actually converge, and how can we name those things and be upfront about that? And so I think that being aware of the unique distinctives of different leaders and organizations and groups that we're working with is really important, and then having explicit conversations about the kind of ways that our interests do converge. What venues or platforms have you used to build visibility and engagement beyond the echo chambers? I guess I'm a bit of old school and new school. I mean, I believe in being, as I already said, the whole idea around showing up, being physically visible, being present in body. But I also, I use a lot of social media, have done that for a while, probably not as much as I used to, but still I see that as a good means to connect with folks who are connecting in that way. And so for the work that I do, that allows me to be able to keep people in our community updated, seeing what's happening, so that those that are interested know what's happening and that they can join in when they want to. And so, being physically visible, socially visible, I think all of those things. Also, taking advantage of institutional visibility was huge. One of the things I was involved in prior, which was prior to doing the faith-based organizing through the Thriving Together program, we had something called Free Together. It was a much smaller kind of independent work, but when we were able to use the institutional visibility of Messiah University to launch a much bigger program, we were able to do it at a much larger scale, and the effectiveness of it has been way more broad. And so I think just kind of leveraging the institutional relationships and visibility that you have available to you is also really key. Again, that goes back to relationships as well, that you have those formed. So anyway, those are some of the ways that I'm kind of engaging some of those questions.
Great. Thank you. We have with us Susan Spicka, who is with PA Ed Voters, and you just talked about institutional relationships and leveraging that. There are schools in every part of Pennsylvania, and I would love for Susan to tell us a little bit about the work that they're doing on school funding, school equity issues, but also where we might partner, where we might come alongside, where we might leverage the issues that they're thinking about, but also call attention to them. Whatever thoughts you have, Susan, why don't you come up here and share a little bit about what you do and ideas that you might have for how we can build coalitions more broadly. And then we'll hear from Sandra Miller with AAUW. And then we'll have some questions, so be preparing some questions.
Thank you. So I'm the Executive Director of Education Voters of Pennsylvania, which was founded in 2007 to promote a pro-public education agenda by engaging people in the political process so that we would make sure that key decision makers, whether they're school board members or state lawmakers, would have a pro-public education agenda as like at the top of the work that they do. And so we've long partnered with the AAUW and the League of Women Voters in working on the issue of helping people understand at the local level the role that the state legislature plays in the school funding that your district gets. And I think that there is a real disconnect between what people think of as their local property taxes and their school district and what's happening there, and the actions that lawmakers take in Harrisburg. Because I came into this in 2011, and this was my education on the issue happened when Governor Corbett said we're going to cut $1 billion from school funding. 4 parents, 4 moms got together in Shippensburg, and we made little t-shirts that said, education, you got what you pay for. We went to our local school board meeting, and we said, you can't cut funding from our kids' schools. You just can't do it. You can't cut these programs. And the 9 white men school board members looked up at us and just said, don't you understand, if the state cuts $1 million from our budget, we have no way to make that up at the local level. What do you expect us to do? We can't raise property taxes to do that. So we went back to my living room and we were like, no one's paying attention to this. What are we going to do? We've got to make people pay attention. And so then we went to Harrisburg and we held a mock bake sale. And so we brought piles of cookies and we said, we're parents and they're going to cut $1.2 billion from schools in Pennsylvania. So we need to sell 2.4 billion cookies to make up the difference to try to get like the idea out to people. But it was at that moment that I had the understanding that it was my state lawmakers who were actually the ones making the decisions that were impacting the quality of education that my kids would get. So we have long partnered in holding education forums with the AAUW and the League of Women Voters in a lot of different rural areas to try to make that connection. And so right now, we are waiting very eagerly for the decision in Pennsylvania's school funding lawsuit to be issued by the judge. So I think many of you probably know, years ago, the school parents and school districts came together and they filed a lawsuit saying Pennsylvania's school funding system is unconstitutional. It is not thorough and efficient, which is guaranteed in the Constitution. It also violates the Equal Protection Clause. It went through the courts and then finally it went to trial. The trial started in November of last year. It lasted until March. It was 4 long months of day in and day out testimony. We came out of that trial feeling as though the plaintiffs had proved their case beyond any reasonable doubt. So the judge has had all this information, and a single judge is going to issue a decision. We expect it like literally any day. What is going to happen is that if it's in our favor, the other side, the defendants who are the state lawmakers, they will appeal it. And if we are the ones who lose, then our side will appeal it. But ultimately, there will be no action taken to fix school funding by state lawmakers, even if the school funding system is declared unconstitutional by the state Supreme Court, because there will be not teeth to force them to do anything. It will come down to people like us getting out and making it known in our communities that we have an unconstitutional school funding system and that our state lawmakers are responsible for fixing it. So we are going to be working on and getting people in every community around the state to be able to talk about this issue and to lift this up. So we did a lot of work organizing rallies and organizing actions in people's communities over the course of the school of the trial, we like actually brought my toilet to the Capitol steps because there was a superintendent who testified that 75 kindergartners were sharing a single toilet in his school district. So we had a rally called 75 to 1, and we read 75 different statements about the horrendous, unconstitutional, just like unbelievable learning conditions that students are in Pennsylvania. It is unacceptable, it's amoral, and if we all come together, we can speak up and we can have our state lawmakers understand that we will not accept this for our children any longer. But if we can't help people understand that it is state lawmakers who are responsible for this and not their school boards, then we're just gonna, they've been able to skate by. They've been able to blame school boards for raising taxes. They've been able to blame school boards for everything and get off scot-free. And so that is kind of up to us right now. So, we're at voterspa.org. If you go to our website, you can sign up for emails. But then also, our website will have a lot of updates as soon as that decision drops. And I can tell you, it's just, we're like on pins and needles because we're going to need to organize a lot of events coming up. And so while you're talking about charter school reform, also, there is a lot of accountability when lawmakers have people coming to talk to them about their kids' education, but there is no accountability if they don't hear from people. So thank you.
Thanks. And Sandra's going to tell us a little bit about AUW, but I want you all to be thinking, so where are the gaps? And I know that Nick talked earlier about trying, where are the gaps between what organizations are doing, what people understand. So for instance, what I just heard from Susan is, if people don't understand who's making those decisions, they might be unhappy that their schools aren't getting funded well, but they don't know where to go with that. And then if they think, well, my legislator promised to do this, but it's not happening, so it's those people in Philly, which is what we hear. It's, well, those people in Philly. It's like, how? What are people in Philly have no say over what happens on the state agenda or the state budget at all, none, zero. How do we fill those gaps? How do we help people understand what they need to know to get structural change? She'll be thinking about questions, but let's hear what AAUW is doing on this.
Thanks, Carol. So it started out as an Ed Voters activity. I'm the advocacy coordinator for Education Voters of Pennsylvania, and AAUW needed a public policy chair. They reached out to Susan, and Susan said, oh, I have this lady that might do this for you. So the next thing you know, that's coalition building at its best, probably. I've been involved with school funding for a long time, and I had the unique opportunity to do something when it came to public policy. But AAUW is really focused on economic security. Very interesting global kind of a thought, but it really leans itself very well for the power mapping and the discussions you had on coalitions. We are all volunteer, so we don't have any paid executive directors or anyone that can do a lot of this work. So we rely heavily on the volunteer work of our members and our branches. I wanted to point out on what we do in that capacity as volunteers. We work, I must have a really loud voice so that he has to close the door, right? I was going to say, that is I'm not sure that's a good thing or a bad thing, that they're slamming the door on me as I'm speaking. I wanted to point out a few things that volunteer organizations do. We do a lot of memberships of campaigns. So, for example, we are participants in the campaign for women's health. Economic security and women's health obviously dovetail really well together. In addition to that, I participate in the Access, there you go. The Access Matters and Planned Parenthood, because reproductive rights obviously is important for us because that gives us a control over economic freedom. I also work with League of Women Voters because we're caring about how opportunities affect our women and opportunities for rules got me linked in, and I had been part of fair districts. So when you have these broad topics, you have to really look at what campaigns are existing and then join those campaigns. I really believe strongly in also participating and signing on to their letters. If an organization asks your organization to participate in their sign-on, sign that letter. You review it, you bring it to your president and say, this is a topic that really impacts our membership. We should sign on to that letter. If they have Zoom meetings, I go to more monthly Zoom meetings than you can imagine. I go to We the People Zoom meetings. I go to League of Women Voters Zoom meetings. I try to attend them all, from school board and school funding issues all the way to AAUW, and it leads to more organizational contacts. I was on the Women's Health Campaign for Women's Health the other day. They started talking about transgender. I was representing AAUW on that message, but we're working at Ed Voters on transgender youth and protecting students and activities in school boards. So I got the woman from the Commission for LGBTQ and the Commission for Women out of Harrisburg to now join our table for PA Wins, which is now going to be protecting our young children. So that is how you get them, but you need, as we say, to show up. You go to their meetings, you sign on to their letters, and you need to make sure that I don't sign up for something and then try not to go. Everybody has Zoom meetings and they don't attend. Even if the topic isn't something that you think is necessarily your favorite topic, you'll never know if you don't attend the meeting, and you never know what the relationship will bring you in the future. So you need to be committed to the idea of building that relationship, attending the meeting, and showing up. And I think like everybody else hit it. You know, there's so much that all of us do, and we all interconnect. And if we all support each other, I think we'll be much more successful than staying in our silos. And I think, you know, coalition building is all about what each person in this room can bring to the table. And if you don't show up to the table, it's never going to be successful for any of us.
Thank you. Okay, so questions. Susan.
So I'm concerned a little bit. I have concerns about the fact that Fair Districts PA is nonpartisan, so of course I want to support equitable funding, but we don't want to take a position on that. I want to say that should get a vote. So I feel a little like, can I actually sign their petition? I mean, maybe I can as me, but not as the Fair Districts coordinator. Is that true, or can you speak of that?
Yeah, so we all have different kind of organizational constraints, and so the challenge is to figure out how do we work together within our organizational constraints. So yeah, so there are some things that you can personally sign the petition, but Fair Districts PA is not going to sign on to all of those different issues. We're not. Our focus is redistricting reform and legislative rules, but we can certainly say, here's a really important bill. It's got all of this support. No action on this for years after. I mean, we can do the research and we can share the message of this is a thing that has obvious support. Nothing's been done. That's wrong. So we can keep saying, you know, whatever the reasons for and against this thing, there's obvious concern from the community. There's obvious bipartisan support. How dare you ignore this? So something like the pre-canvass bill. You know, we're not. The League of Women Voters, of course, has a very strong position on that. Fair Districts PA, we're not election protection folks. We're, you know, redistricting and let's get better rules. But we can certainly say every county commissioner in Pennsylvania asked you to fix this thing, and that's red counties and blue counties and purple counties, and how dare you simply ignore it? How dare you? Or the charter school funding, 88% of school districts have said, we need you to vote on charter school funding reform. How dare you ignore that thing? Or the lead exposure. You know, this is not a partisan issue. This is, you know, you legislators, you formed a commission, you got the commission recommendations. Those commissions have people from all over the state, all those different stakeholders, experts from every part of our communities, and they gave you specific recommendations and you ignored them? How dare you? So that's our message. It's not we're signing on to this particular thing or we're supporting that particular issue. We don't want to spread ourselves as if we're experts with opinions on those things. We're not. We're simply saying what we see as just watchful observers is there is support for this thing and you are not allowing a vote. Democracy demands that your rules permit these things to be given a vote. So that's our message. And we can take that message a long way, and we can talk, you know, to the press, we can talk on radio, we can inform and educate people about the legislative process that keeps the justice issues we all care about but aren't our issue. We can insist those things be given a vote, and that's what we want to do. I hope that helps. Any other questions? Yes.
I wanted to thank FDPA. I live in Lancaster City in the new 49th House District, which would not have existed, I think, but for your work. And these are my friends from the same district. And Amy Rufo, we knocked thousands of doors, I'm not kidding, for our candidate Izzy Smith-Waddell, who is now our representative. And I can't tell you how good it feels to be represented by a young, person, wonderful person, many, many attributes, different. Yeah, it's just terrific, and I can't thank FDPA enough. And I know it was a long road. It was 10 years probably in your life. 7. Well, that doesn't sound so bad. 7. Thank you. There's so much more to do, but really, since the election, I've just been. This is incredible. So thank you, FDPA.
So, and let me say, the whole electoral thing, I mean, we constantly, for Fair Districts PA, we constantly walk the line of how do we be good friends and good partners and stay true to our focus. And so we've got lots of people who are saying, well, I take this hat off and I take this sign down, and then I go over there. Or I take this T-shirt off and I go over there. And so we know that many of you are knocking doors and doing other things, supporting other organizations, kind of walking back and forth and towing the line and building relationships that are supportive in one place. And it's never a quid pro quo. Let's be super clear. It's not, I'm going to show up for you, and then you're going to show up and wear my Fix Harrisburg T-shirt. No, it's we're going to show up for you because what you're doing is really essential to the work of justice and democracy in Pennsylvania. We're going to let you know what we're doing, and if you want to join us, we're going to be happy. But that's not the deal. The deal is that we're going to show up for you, and we're going to support what you're doing. And I want to go back to the youth vote thing, because I think that's another place that we can be super effective without much investment, and we can really energize the work of democracy in places that maybe we can't see another good way to do it, which is to, in all of our school districts, we want kids to know that their vote matters, and that once they turn 18, they can vote. And even if they turn 18 between the deadline and the election, they can register to vote. We want to make sure that they know that. So getting those PA Youth Vote organizations in our local schools is not hard to do. You find one slightly interested high school student, you find one slightly interested teacher, and you say, hey, would you do this thing, and I'll support you. If you need materials, I'll get them. I'll pay for them. What do you need? I'll support whatever that is. And get your local League of Women Voters involved in that too, because that's like their bread and butter, is getting people registered. As a League member, before I got involved in Fair Districts PA, I went to my local high school and sat there and registered some students. But somebody like me, showing up one day, spending a couple hours in their cafeteria, is not the same thing as having a student there and recruiting their own friends and saying, let's try to beat the school down the road that got 93%. We're going to get 95%. I mean, these are contests going on that school students, once they hear it, they're like, okay, yeah, give us the list of people's birthdays and we'll make sure that they're all registered. We can do that. That really energizes and encourages democratic, little d democracy in communities all over the place. And then once they get started, they say, so who is it that we're voting for? How do we know that? And then we introduce Vote 411. And then they start looking at candidates, and then they say, what else do we need to know? And we can continue those conversations. Susan.
Actually, thanks, Carol. That's a segue to something I wanted to just share a little bit with you about what we're doing. Again, Indiana County, this is a partnership between the League of Women Voters, FDPA, and our local university, IUP. What we're in the process right now of putting together is a contest, basically. It's the three of our organizations, along with a group of students that are interested in political science and good government and civic engagement, and also students from the art and the communications departments as well. And what we're doing is working with the students to first educate them about some of the rules issues and some of the voting issues, but then allowing them to inform us about how to set up and create a contest that will be for all students in the university, but also the students in all of the high schools in the area as well. And what we're asking them to do is design messaging and also places. So it can be a song. I don't think we're going to see any rap in Indiana County, but you never know. But it will likely be country and western. But it could be an art piece, it could be a video, it could be any one of a number of different things. The sky is really the limit. And our aim is to have a contest that pulls all this together in April, in which the students would present what their messaging regarding votes, regarding however the students opt to frame this. And there's going to be cash prizes that we're going to give. Not very much, like $100 or something, but there will be cash prizes for some of the best, and then explore with the students about venues, about how to get those things out. So we are doing registering, but we're trying to engage them more fully as well as educate them in the process of exercising their own voice in the process too. So I just wanted to share the idea with you. Yeah? What's that? Actually, we've got, even in Indiana County, just from our local, the dues that we pay, we have a small pot of money that has a couple $1,000s that has come together, and we'll be using that for some gifts for kids in different age groups, college versus high school kids, et cetera, at different ages. So that's how we're doing it. We're also going to seek donations, of course.
Any other questions? Yes.
I am a teacher. I teach at SciTech, that's right behind over here. And last year, I started working with my students on a civic engagement program through the governor's office. And that was my first year doing it. We got about 65% of the students registered to vote who were eligible. This year, we got 95% of the students registered. But the kids last year, they didn't really know anything about it. They were kind of hesitant about it. But this year, they were so into it. I mean, like, they turn 18, they run to my classroom and they're, oh, I registered to vote. You know, they're super excited about it. The governor's Civic Engagement Award is given out in May, and that's for high schools, and there's a criteria that we have to meet. And that is a really cool program because the kids actually get an award. And they were so excited when they received their awards. So it was a little something, but we were able to get them hooked. And now we have them hooked. And I'm super excited about keeping doing that. The kids are working at election polls in incredible numbers. I recruit students who speak more than one language so they can help in some of their precincts that need language assistance. And they love doing that. You would be surprised, but they do really enjoy it. So that's our way to hook them. So.
That's terrific. And you might be thinking, well, we're not teachers, but we can at least promote things. We can publicize things on our social media. We can mention them. If you're doing emails to your local groups, you can just point to and we, I don't know if you've noticed this, but if you get Fair Districts PA emails, we will periodically say, hey, this group is doing this thing, here's the link. So for instance, the ballot PA thing where they're working on open primaries. We're not working on open primaries. We think it's a great idea. We think it would lower the pace of partisan craziness, but that's not the issue that we're working on. But we will occasionally say, Community 70 is working on this thing, here's the link to their petition. Put it in the PS so it's clear. This isn't the point of our email, but you can get there that way. Or the PA Youth Vote or things of that sort to say, if you're a teacher or have a student in this age group, you could just check this here and go look. Nick, I wanted to hear a little bit more about what you're doing with registering voters in prison, because that's something I think that League folks would be interested, but Fair Districts PA, and just to say, I mean, something that Fair Districts groups all across the state have done, and if you haven't, think about it, is to partner up with folks who are doing voter registration of all kinds. So if the League is doing a Saturday voter registration outside a library and is looking for folks to help, please, go ahead and do that. Whatever we can do, I mean, our goal is to say that your vote matters, your vote counts, but you gotta vote. And so if we can be encouraging folks to vote, we really wanna do that. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about getting folks registered in prison and how we could be helping, or local jails too.
Happy to. This is a pet project of mine from way before I joined All Voting is Local. Again, and my partner Jenna and I are both formerly incarcerated. She kind of kicked it off when she was working with Penn Franchise Project, got the Dropbox put in the Center County Correctional Facility, and we worked in conjunction with the PA Prison Society, with Black Voters Matters. In Philadelphia, that looked like folks going into the jail and actually bringing in voter registration forms. And then identifying a pipeline for getting those voter registration forms mailed out in time to the elections office so they can be counted. I look to hopefully next year start trying to expand this work into way more counties across the Commonwealth, outside of Philadelphia, outside of Pittsburgh, and you're gonna need some help. So I will take all the help they can possibly get. The problem with Pennsylvania and voting in jail is that there's 67 counties and there's 67 different ways that it's done. Also, people don't know you can vote while you're incarcerated, including the county commissioners, including the wardens, including the guards. And so there's a lot of misinformation flowing around out there. So I'm going to spend the next week in my Q1 planning for next year. So I'll have more details on what that might look like. But we'd love to see a unified process, or unified, the word I'm looking for is policy. There we go. Unified policy for how people are able to request their absentee ballots, and how those ballots are then turned back into the elections office. And I would love to see drop boxes put into different, I see you back there, into different jails. I also want to give a shout out to the PA Prison Society. They went in and registered 400 voters in Columbia County Jail. My team, in conjunction with the other organizations I mentioned, went into Philadelphia. I think there's a lot more that can be done there. It's probably going to be a bit of a process because we got to get people to care about it. But anyone with connections to your county commissioners, who are typically the ones who sit on your prison board, let's talk. I had a question here. Yeah. Okay. Sorry, back here first. Yeah.
Let's not forget parole office.
Yes.
Parole office, a lot of people come out, still don't know that they can vote.
Yep.
And just having voter registration there, and they have a nice little brochure from the State Department about who can vote, that I print up, and I put a packet of those out with voter registration at the parole office.
That's fantastic. Thank you for saying that. Thank you for that. I am making a mental note. Also, we need to educate the counties, right? I have heard multiple stories, and I know there's a bunch of hands in the back, so I'll come back. I've heard multiple stories of people getting out, going to the assistant's office, and being told, you can't vote anymore. I had a woman come up to me and talk to me earlier and say, so-and-so that I know has had some issues. How long until their felony allows them to vote? I'm like, no. They could vote the day they walked out of that jail. And so we really have a lot of education to do. I saw hands back in the back. Yep, ma'am, in the middle. In the back. Behind you. Yeah, behind you. Behind you. Yes. Hi. Yes. Sorry. I'm so sorry. You're next. Active disenfranchisement of people in county. Let's talk more, because that Lancaster County infuriates me sometimes, y'all. All right, ma'am, I'm sorry, your turn. And I see you back there. Sure. Philadelphia. Yeah. Prison gerrymandering. Yeah, that was them. Carolyn, Jenna. Yeah. By the way, big round of applause for the huge win on prison gerrymandering earlier this year. Well done. I know there's a question back in the back over here. Oh, that was your question? Okay, great. Any other questions?
So Nick,
Yes.
if people are registering in Chester County, but they're from Philadelphia, and there's a drop box,
It's got to go to Philly. Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a lot of work.
Yeah, there's a lot of work, a lot of education. Yeah, it cannot be in the Dropbox. That would not be counted.
So just on the prison gerrymandering thing, I want to mention, I don't know if you all know this, but many of you watched our regional forums on prison gerrymandering, and we work with Abolitionist Law Center. We also work with Free the Ballot. Jenna Henry was the contact from Free the Ballot. Jenna is Nick's wife, just so you know that. So I asked Jenna, who was a really good organizer and would do organizing training, hoping that she would do it. And she said, oh, no, Nick will do that. So just so you know, maybe we'll get Jenna to come do it sometime. but we're, happy to have them both on the democracy front in Pennsylvania. Yes?
I just have a quick question. Do they have stamps for those? You have to provide them?
So this is an issue that I think a lot of us can be working together. I mean, the League of Women Voters I know would be, as a former board member, I'm sure the League would be interested in engaging in this, but it's also something Fair Districts PA can do. Your vote is your voice. That's what our original screen on our original PowerPoint said, and we are adamant about making sure people's votes are their voice. How do we help that happen? So things like figuring out how to get those registration forms done, but also making sure that people have stamps to mail their ballots, helping to think through that. So any way we can help in that, we want to partner with that. I think the one last thing, is there any other questions? Because if not, I'll give a little bit of a last thoughts, and then we'll have last thoughts from our other folks. Any other questions? One thing, Tom Ulrich talked earlier about those meetings that he had in his Bethlehem UU Church basement. And I want to circle back to that, because I have this thought of, there are churches that aren't going to get super actively involved in things, but they might be willing to host a monthly meeting of people just to talk about needs, to talk about what are our shared concerns. So we know that broadband access in parts of Pennsylvania is huge, and places that if farmers and local businesses and Airbnbs and those kinds of places can't get on the internet, they just go under. They can't compete. They can't attract what they need to do. And that's a problem. Or if schools are underfunded or don't have transportation or begin to lose the extra programs that they had, or if people can't find childcare, so then they can't work. Those kinds of things, just to have a place where community members come and talk about, we have this rat card that basically says, Pennsylvanians all want the same things: healthy families, thriving communities, decent wages for reliable work, well-funded schools, clean air and water, a government that works for us all. So one of the things that we can do is start just local conversations on what are the things that we need that our legislature promises and is not delivering. Can we agree on those things? Can we talk about those? Can we share how this is impacting us? And then can we talk about what we could do? And what we could do is we could begin to organize, we could begin to understand how our legislature works, we could begin to hold our legislators accountable, we could begin to talk to our legislators about the fact that they've promised to address property taxes for 30 years and done nothing. They've promised to solve the school funding issue for 30 years and done nothing. They've had reports on broadband for 20 years and done nothing. And so can we begin to have conversations, not starting from a partisan place, not even starting from a here's what we're going to do, but just we want to invite community members from different churches to come and talk about what our community needs. And this could be in rural communities, it could be in urban communities. What is it that we need to thrive? What is getting in the way of us thriving? And what could we ask our local legislators to do to make sure that these things thrive? And then we could begin to invite people to talk about legislative rules. We could begin to invite people from different organizations, and this is what Tom Ulrich's group eventually did, was just each time have maybe a video, or maybe have a speaker, or maybe have a small panel of different people saying, here's one approach, not taking any real strong position, but just informing people and giving people a chance to start thinking and talking together and kind of envisioning what would it look like for our community to thrive, and how can we play a part in that, because that's what we all want. We want our communities to thrive. And I know those, Susan was talking about those rural towns where it's a heartbreak. I was in Sullivan County, in the county seat of Sullivan County, which was a thriving town, and now the one little grocery store there is closed. The one bank there is closed. I went with a bunch of birders for a weekend, and we stayed in this hotel, and the hotel owner said, we've been trying to sell it for years because we want to move with our kids. They've moved to another state, and they want to move, but they can't find anybody to buy their one little hotel because they don't even have internet, and people can't even make phone calls. And we went up to the highest point in the county, and my phone started dinging because my daughters had been texting me all weekend wondering what I was up to. It was the only place in the county where I could get text messages. How can you have a county thrive when you've got that? And so how do we get people to begin to talk about what is getting in the way of our community thriving, of having a place that our kids want to want to grow up. Our kids can find jobs. We can continue to live in a place we love. How do we do that? And can churches be part of that? Can schools be part of that? Can we be part of catalyzing that? So just think. Yes, go ahead.
Carol, Tom's church was probably following rules that my son, the minister, drafted a long time ago for you. Every church can host the kind of meetings you're describing on issues, not
Yeah.
candidates,
Yeah.
not specific bills, issues.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
They can and should, and as long as they avoid specific, so he invites somebody from each party, okay, immediately, and help them understand that everything need not be seen through a partisan lens.
Yep.
There's a broader lens, as you say, communities need to thrive. That's not a partisan issue.
Yep. Yep. So let's help catalyze that. Would our panelists like to say a last word for us before we start?
I will be talking a little bit about this topic in a little bit, but I do think I've seen the power of bringing congregations together to have conversations, and I've seen folks who knew very little about what was going on in their neighborhoods begin to get drawn in deeper and deeper once they actually were aware of what was actually happening and the kind of impact that they could actually have to respond to these issues. And so, again, across the board, all different kinds of denominations, different racial backgrounds, and kind of from progressive to moderate and even some conservative. And so I think that there is great power in bringing people together, creating space where those who are most impacted can share their lived experiences and their stories, I think is really powerful. And you'd be surprised that a lot of people's hearts break open and actually want to respond in action and try to get more involved once they have a better sense of what's happening. And so I think there's great potential there to kind of bring people across divides. In fact, that's how I'll start my next session, but we just had a bunch of faith leaders who have never been involved in the public square at all. November 4th, for Power Interfaith, we had folks in Harrisburg show up for the very first time, many of them, to speak up against white Christian nationalism and how it's destroying our democracy, right? And so that was a result of getting together one-on-ones, bring them into a church basement, and then inviting them to get involved even further, and many of them did.
Susan, one last word.
Anybody in my family can tell you that I don't have just one last word. But I'll be brief. Mostly I just want to affirm hope. These are fights that I've been engaged in for 40 years now. Again, in the growing poverty in rural areas and the hopelessness that people experience there. But I don't know that I've ever had as much of an experience of the possibility of change as I did in the last election. And I thank you for that. Thank you so much for the work you've done so far. It is incremental. We have a long ways to go, but it's an honor to be a part of this group. And thank you for what you're doing. It's making a difference, and we keep pressing on.